So I'm joined today by my colleagues Bethan, Gavin, Anthony, Lucy, and Chris, who will help with the demonstration and the Q&A session. Standard housekeeping, really. If you can just ensure that you're on mute with the cameras switched off. If you've got any questions, we would encourage questions. Please do ask anything that you feel is relevant to VMFI, and if you could put those into the chat function. If there's a question that is there that is similar to one that you would want to ask, if you can like that, and then that will give us an idea of how we can prioritize the questions that seem most important to the wider group of you. But what we will do is we'll make sure that we answer as many questions during this call as we can. But for any that we don't answer, we will send out a question sheet back to everybody, question and answer sheet back to everybody, and just make sure that everything is covered. If you do have other questions after the webinar is finished, then certainly do get in contact with us, either through the address that Anthony gave or the general comms email box that we do have. So we'll go through development of VMFI along with a brief summary. Bethan will give a demonstration followed by a Q&A. And as I mentioned, do add questions to the chat as we go along. And at some points we will have a snap poll just to gain some quick views from yourselves, really. And these will appear on the screen, but also within the chat, so you can complete them either way. So the Better Financial Reporting Programme looks at improvements to the way that schools send financial data to the department. And we look to achieve this by assessing the way that data is sent to us in a way that gives you valuable insights into your position, enabling more empowered decision making by schools. Secondly, capturing the data as efficiently as possible and only collecting it once. And thirdly, introducing a way to automate the collection from financial management systems. So forms are populated with this data, and it just needs to be reviewed prior to submitting. And it's part of that, the actual completion of the forms, the manual inputting of the data is something that through user research we've found can take quite a bit of the time. So development of VMFI started in 2019. We gathered an understanding of user needs, and we brought those concepts into development. And in February of 2020, we launched the first full build of VMFI, concentrating on the academy sector. And over the last couple of years, we've extended the tool further with the maintained sector and included a wider set of users. And by the start of April of this year, we've updated VMFI so it includes the data for the 2020/2021 financial years of both sectors. Volunteers, I mean, it's been one of the things that throughout our development of VMFI, we've looked to you, to the users, to guide and frame the way that we've built it. And this has been done through user research and feedback, which we've received from you. The updates which have made have been done in the same way, and we find it so valuable hearing from yourselves about what's working well, and also what isn't working. It's one of these things that we want to design this so that it enables you to get the best use out of this. So if there are comments that you have, if you can support us with looking at any case studies where maybe you've been able to look at contracts in a different way because of the financial position that you've seen yourself compared to your peers. And at some points during the year, we'll also be looking at user research to look at particular components which we've developed. or want to develop, and just to make sure that, again, that is in a way that enables you to gain the best out of this tool. So VMFI contains data from the financial returns of the maintained schools through the consistent financial reporting framework, and the academy schools through the account return, as well as data from collections such as the school census. We now have 3 years of data in VMFI, and from that we can show a comparison to the previous year's figures and how your spend and that of your peers have changed. Access is available for finance teams, school leaders, governors and trustees, as well as granting access to school resource management advisors who may be supporting your schools. VMFI will select a set of 30 default comparators for your school from the same sector. So if you're a maintained school, from maintained schools, and likewise academies from academies. But you can choose to have this selection from both the academy sector and the maintained sector for when we hold the same financial year's information. With the additional functionality we've built into the tool, we've looked to give you further insights on how your spend compares with peers and to signpost you to areas of support through the commercial recommendations and resources. The VMFI tool has been designed to support finance teams within the school sector through increased efficiency by reducing the need for desk-based research regarding financial insights and data, better decision making through providing up-to-date and customizable data insights to help identify areas for further investigation, and offering access to commercial resources, including government contracts, frameworks, and guidance. I'll now pass on to Bethan to give a demonstration of the tool. And as mentioned earlier, please do use the chat function for any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thanks, Kel, and thanks everyone for joining today. I've just shared my screen, so hopefully you should be able to kind of see the homepage of VMFI pop up for you there. I've seen a couple of comments in the chat of people not seeing or hearing the recording. So if you can't see the screen, maybe do try just kind of logging off and logging back on again, and that does seem to oddly work and fix the issue. If not, Anthony will be, as you mentioned in the chat, sending a recording round, so you'll be able to still access it there. We have put on these webinars over the last year, just to give a bit of a flavour of VMFI, kind of what it does, how it works, and it kind of talk through the latest update. So if you've joined one previously, I will go through kind of the changes that have happened in VMFI and some of the new functionality. If you haven't joined one before, that's absolutely fine. I'll kind of talk through the basics as well. Throughout the development of VMFI, one of the things that we've really tried to keep the focus on is making this as useful as possible for users like yourselves. So the two ways that we've really focused on trying to do that. Firstly, many school users told us that they felt they were sending their data into the DFE, but not necessarily hearing anything back from us. So this really tries to address that. It's using all the returns that you kind of submit to the department, either through the accounts return, the consistent financial reporting term, the census, and so on. So that just pulls together all of that data and presents it in this form of analysis. The second thing that we heard and we've really tried to address is just the time pressure that staff in schools are facing at the minute. So how we've done that is really tried to bring out clear starting points, and we're very aware that we don't have the context and we don't know what's going on and what strategic decisions have been made in your school. So we just point out kind of what the data says and where you're an outlier based on that. So please do kind of apply the context of your own position to that. So a little bit of background there. For the demo today, we've got a dummy account. So this could represent either a trust or a local authority. And it's using entirely made up sort of schools and entirely made up data. There are one or two small differences between the sectors, which I'll point out as I go along. But when you first log into VMFI, we'll end up on this home page here, and you'll see there's two tabs just at the top of the page here. So we've got a trust or local authority level view tab and a school view tab. I'll start over on the trust or local authority level view and kind of come onto the school view later in the demo. As I kind of mentioned in that intro, the way the tool works is using the data that's submitted in the accounts return, the AR, or the consistent financial reporting framework, the CFR. Within those returns, we collect expenditure data, and we collect 35 different headings of expenditure data. We've taken those headings, and in VMFI, we've put them into 9 different cost categories. 8 of those cost categories contain data that we believe is comparable between schools. And then there's a couple of bits of expenditure where actually we don't think they are necessarily comparable. So the example I kind of always use for that is spend on special facilities. They really aren't the same from school to school. So that expenditure is included in the tool, but it's all under a cost category which we've called other, where we don't believe the data is comparable. So for those 9 cost categories, we then have kind of taken a bit of a step back and look at what is driving those costs. So for some types of expenditure, such as teaching or IT, we believe a good driver of those costs is sort of the number of pupils in a school, the proportion of those pupils on free school meals and with low-lying special educational needs. But there are 2 cost categories in particular. So one of them is up here, premise costs, and there's also utility costs, where actually we don't believe that pupil numbers are the main driver of those costs. And it's actually better to look at the building characteristics. So that's things like the gross internal floor area and the age of the buildings in the school as a driver of those costs. So to account for that, we put every school into 2 comparator groups within the tool. So one comparator group is with the most similar schools based on those pupil characteristics, and one is with the most similar schools based on those building characteristics. And then for the cost categories, we use the comparator group for the driver of those cost categories, which hopefully means that the insights in the tool are a little more focused and a bit more helpful in helping you to kind of understand the position that your school is kind of operating in. So that's a lot of background information, but I am going to start running through a few of the different screens in VMFI now. So this first one you get is the top 3 areas for investigation, and this is looking at for those kind of cost categories in every school in your trusted local authority, which cost category in which school is the greatest outlier when compared to those similar schools. And this just flags up the top 3 outliers. Users told us when we kind of initially released this that was helpful, but really didn't go far enough, and they wanted much more than 3. So at this bottom left-hand corner, we've got an areas for investigation tab. And this pulls through much more of the details. So we've got a ranked table, and that includes all the areas for investigation. So all the cost categories for all the schools in the trust or local authority are kind of included within this table here. It's quite an interactive page, so you're able to click into the various different buttons, and that will filter the table below. And equally, the graph is interactive as well. So if you're interested in seeing kind of what the red on this utilities are, you can just click and it will bring those categories up. The graph at the top here includes those different cost categories, but we also have a bit of a toggle, so you can see it by school as well. This may be more or less helpful depending on the size of your trust or local authority. If you are in quite a large organisation, we can filter this down here on the left hand side as well. So you can reduce the kind of number of schools or phases. And you can drill in on a particular school as well if you're only interested in kind of one school. One thing that I did want to mention that is new for this release is in the school phase or type category. So the comparator groups that I just spoke about are based on schools of a similar phase. So primary schools will only ever be compared to primary schools. Similarly, special schools are only ever compared to special schools. And we had a bit of feedback on webinars like this that all through schools would like to be included as their own phase. So in this latest release, we now have a new school phase type for academies. So when we're calculating the similar schools based on those pupil characteristics, we now have a group specifically for all through schools. So you will only be compared to the most similar other all through schools. If you're a maintained school, there wasn't enough all through schools to be able to make a comparator group. So maintained schools will remain in the secondary school phase when you initially log in. There is an option, I'm just scrolling up here, to change that position. There's a tick box here, and that will allow the school to be compared across both sectors. When we're comparing across both sectors, we can compare you to all three schools across both. So that's, sorry, very detailed just for all three schools there, if there are any on the call. If that wasn't clear, do drop us an email and I'll talk through the all through position with you separately. So hopefully this page is quite helpful in seeing sort of an overall position. I'll just jump back onto the main view here, and I'm going to go down to the right hand side where there's either a trust cost overview for multi-academy trusts or a local authority cost overview. And if I jump into this page, what we have is a graph for each of the different cost categories, and you can kind of scroll down the page there and see them all. These graphs are available either on a per pupil metre squared basis, on actuals, percentage of school expenditure, or percentage of school income. So there's a number of different views there, and that's just to help looking at things through different lenses. If your schools are kind of in different areas, actually they might have different levels of funding, so it might be better to look at it as a percentage rather than in an actual basis and so on. I'm also just going to pop on this RAG status, and it really changes the view of this page, so you can hopefully get at a bit of a glance kind of areas that might be interesting to look into across the trust or local authority. So kind of eye is drawn to this premise staff and services category for this particular dummy account. And what this graph is really saying is for Coketown Cross Keys Primary School, when it's compared to its 30 most similar schools, it's coming out amber. Whereas Coketown West High School, when it's compared to its 30 most similar schools is coming out red. So these aren't being compared with each other. This is compared to their own comparator group. And really it's just to give an idea of perhaps common procurements or something across the entire trust or local authority that might be worth looking into. If you do want any more details on these cost categories, there's a link under each graph which takes you through to another page with more detail. So as you can see here, there's different sub-cost categories, or which are the next level of detail down. You're able to get a bit more information and drill into that if you like. We also have a historical comparison toggle. Just pop that on. And we now have 3 years worth of data included when you switch that historical comparison toggle on, so you can see where things have maybe changed over the 3 years. You can see a big kind of jump on supply teaching staff in Coketown West High School here, and it might help get a bit more understanding in that area. So that is all at the sort of trust or local authority level, but then you might be interested in kind of drilling down more to school level. At the minute I have Coketown West High School selected. I can change that and can type in any school within the trust or local authority here and select that instead. As I mentioned earlier, the schools are by default compared to schools within your own sector. So academies are only compared to other academies and maintained with and maintained. If you'd like to look across both sectors, that tick box is there, and it will kind of include the most similar schools from both sectors within the comparator groups. Once you've selected the school that you're interested in, that should take you to this school view here. And similar to on the local authority or trust level view, you'll see the top 2 areas to investigate, and that's across all of the cost categories. Down in this left hand corner, we've got a compare your cost tab, and this is where you can kind of drill into that and find a bit more information. So I'll just select the top one. You can drill into any of the cost categories here. And this puts your school, which is the kind of the blue bar, Coketown West High School in this instance, against the 30 most similar schools. And again, we've got the different tabs, so you can look at that lower level of detail within each of the cost categories. We include the median line on here, so you can kind of get a bit of a gauge as to where your school's sitting. And you can see in this example, the teaching staff costs are quite high compared to the other similar schools. So this message box has popped up. You won't necessarily always see this. It's only where the data is showing as high. And if I click the link, it takes us through to recommendations within this cost category. So this pulls together any guidance or frameworks that are on offer from the department within this particular cost category. If I minimize this, it's brought us in at a particular point, but it's across at the commercial resources tab on the right hand side. So if you are interested in kind of looking into some of the frameworks and guidance that are available from the department without going through that route, you can just come through and click and have a look through any of these. The idea around this really was to move from that position of how is my school doing, or actually it's looking pretty high, and then a really easy link through to seeing what's available from the department within that area as a potential next step. And there's no requirement to use any of these, but it's just to hopefully create that easy link to see what's on offer from the department. Just jump back to the other tab. It's opened itself in a new tab here. The other question we quite often get asked is about the comparators and wanting to know more information about the various comparators along the bottom here. If I jump back, and on the right hand side you've got view your comparator schools. Just let that load. So the first table on the left hand side is the school details for your particular school. Brings through various different characteristics. And then in the centre we have two different tables, comparator schools by those pupil characteristics, and then secondly the comparator schools by building characteristics. And you can select any of those schools within that list and click up the top. And what that'll do is put your school side by side with the comparator school. So I picked the pupil characteristics here, and you can see they're both secondary schools, exactly the same number of pupils, similar percentage of free school meals, similar percentage of special educational needs, and so on. And then just puts those expenditures side by side. And it's really just to give you an idea of what those comparators are kind of look like in terms of characteristics. And then where we hold the information as the department, we include an email address here in case you do want to have a chat with that comparator school and see what they're doing and how they're structuring things. So that's at the school view level. So far, everything that we've talked about is what has been spent. We have included, jumping back across the trust or local authority view here, in the centre, a little bit of information on forecasts and risks. So this is only available at Academy Trust level. We collect the trust level data through the budget forecast return, and so we can only provide it at trust level. But what it does is it plots the values from the budget forecast return, or your forecast values on the purple line there, and then it brings in from the accounts return what has kind of actually been spent. So you can kind of see, you know, how in line or out of kilter the spend and forecast is. That's pulled out in the table below. It just shows you a little bit about the difference and the variance. And then on the right hand side, we've just pulled in a couple of key forecast metrics. Depending on kind of the data in this page, you might see another little pop-up message. So here the trust is forecasting a decline, and so a message is popped up just to kind of alert them to that, and also to let them know what's available from the department to consider whether that would be helpful or not. Following on from this kind of forecast and risk page, for Academy Trusts, we have included that as a, I can just pull this out here, as a download. So you can take this away in PDF or Excel format, and it's just a summary of the trust position with that budget forecast return information up front, and then a little bit of details around the schools further below that. So if you do want to download and take that away, how you access that is, oh, there we go, my presenting thing's gone now, is just up at this top left hand corner. There's a view your education data, which just takes you back to the front, and there's a summary of finances. So instead of jumping into the View My Financial Insights tool, you can pop into the summary of finances if you're an Academy Trust and take that download there. So that's the main sort of for screens on the home page. We do have a load of guidance in this link if you need any further help, and we also have a data definition. So if you're wondering kind of which lines in your CFR were included under teaching and teaching support staff, all of that information is there, so you can map it back to exactly what was sent in to us. Just conscious of time, so I'm going to kind of rattle through these next three quite quickly. We have a select comparators option up at the top. So if there's a set of schools that maybe are local to you, you always compare yourself with, and you'd like to be able to kind of get the VMFI graphs and insights with those schools, you can select them in the select comparators. There's a number of filters down this left hand side, which you can drill down on, or you can just type in the school name up the top and then add it to your comparator list. We recommend that you select between 10 and 30 schools. If you select less than 10, then a number of the RAG features won't be available. So I would look to include around 10 there. Once you've selected the ones that you want to include, just jump onto the review button and you can press create. It takes around 3 or 4 minutes just to rerun that analysis. So maybe just be conscious of that. You can still click through the tool, but just something to be aware of. The next one, data modeling. In a similar way, this allows you to customize some of the values, that's financial and non-financial, so that you can either kind of do a bit of scenario planning or see kind of what would have happened, what position you would be in if there wasn't sort of an anomaly in one particular year. And so maybe you had an influx of pupils one year, but aren't expecting that for the next few years to come, and you might want to put a custom value in there. Similarly, you might have had a lot of sort of staff absence one year, so there's particularly high and maybe supply staff costs, and you want to see what it's like on a normal year. You can put a custom value in and see how you look at against your comparators with that. This won't alter kind of anyone else's data. It's only something that's kind of available locally for yourselves. And finally, there's a curriculum and financial planning module. So if you're already doing curriculum financial planning or ICFP within your own school, then this probably won't help you. So this is a very basic introductory model, really designed for schools that perhaps haven't had the chance or the time or space to be able to do ICFP so far. Where possible, we do pull in your data so we can pre-populate things to kind of reduce the amount of inputs that you have to type in. So we just do a bit of a playback of the data that we hold for your school. And then we ask for a couple of inputs. So I'm just going to scroll through so that you can see them all, but I'll let you go through that at a slower pace in your own time. So there's just those 2 pages, and then it comes out with a deployment plan at the end, playing back some of the information and then some key kind of ICFP metrics. It does just give you a flavour of kind of what things are looking like, and might just give you an idea of whether it's something, some particular areas you'd like to sort of dive into a bit deeper. So I'm sorry that has been such a whistle-stop tour, but I'll probably pause there and hand over to Anthony and Gavin for any questions that have been coming through while I've been running through that.
Hiya everyone. Thank you. There has been a load of questions going on. We've been frantically hammering away at the keyboards trying to answer as many as we can. We're really conscious that you will have been focusing on Bethan's demo rather than what was going on in the chat, so we'll run through as many as we can. And of course, as Kel mentioned at the start, we'll do a full Q&A for everybody on the back of it, so any questions you posed won't go unanswered. Chris has just popped up on the screen a poll, and we'll just like to get your feedback on there. You should just be able to click on that on the screen and let us know if there are any particular areas we'd like more information on. We've run these webinars now for a couple of years as a general overview, and we're just kind of interested as VMFI becomes a bit more embedded, as people kind of get a bit more used to it, if we should change the focus of webinars or put on more bespoke ones. So anything you can do on that would be great. And you should still be able to continue that in the chat. Lots of good answers. Bit of ICFP is a bit of a favourite. Skill view dashboards, great, that's great. Do keep clicking on that. It's in the chat if anybody can't see it on the screen as well. You should be able to respond to it there as well. Anthony, should we try and do our best with Q&A in the last 22 minutes we have?
Yes, thanks, Gav. There's quite a lot of questions, but we'll try and rattle through them. To start with, there's a couple of questions about benchmarking and the differences between VMFI and benchmarking. So what are the differences, and will this replace the old benchmarking site?
Yeah. So when we started out on this journey with VMI Financial Insights, we spent quite a bit of time speaking to schools and asking the question about the insights that we were providing as a department back from the submitted data, which included the benchmarking site. It was a site at the time. As we got feedback from schools about what they would like to see and what would help them, we started to paint a picture, and we recognised that actually a lot of the stuff that was being asked for was more detailed analytics, some clearer messaging, the starting points, the areas to investigate, and it was kind of felt after speaking with schools the best way to do that would be behind a login, so schools could log in securely and work with the tool securely rather than putting all that stuff on a public-facing website. And that's why we kind of created the two tools. There will always be a need for us as a department to transparently report the spending of public funds. So there will always be a home on the for the benchmarking site, for the graphs there, for wider stakeholders, for the public to access. So there will always be the need for both tools. Both are extensively used by the sector. So we are kind of, since VMFI has been around now for a couple of years, we are seeing that both tools have their place and have their use. So they will remain, and they will remain for those reasons.
Thanks, Gav. In relation to special schools, will this be something useful in terms of comparators?
Yeah, so what we tried to do with special schools, which was a bit of a first for us, again, it was something that came back from the feedback, was around the comparator groups of special schools. So what we've tried to do here is create comparator groups based on the return, census return from special schools, which puts a number of pupils in categories of need. And we've tried to create an analytic behind the scenes that groups schools based on the three highest types of need within a school, and use a methodology there to kind of create comparator groups that with similar schools based on the numbers of pupils with types of need. We've always said on these that we're really keen to hear back from special schools if that's not working, if there are schools are similar and not appearing, or if there's anything that's kind of not going quite right. Nothing's come back yet. We're still really open to that if there are any. And of course, for any type of school, the select comparators is there. So if you want to do your own thing, add schools in, remove schools, change it completely, you've got the flexibility in VMFI to do that as well.
Thanks, Gav. Related question, are there comparators for federations who submit figures against one school only?
Yeah, so when we extended to maintain schools, it was kind of our first foray into the world of with federations, and there are a number of different ways that federations are set up. Some share the financial data, some don't. So we've been getting to grips with that. We know it's not perfect, which is a bit of a shame for federations. We are trying to get there. So our ideal is we would like that where data is submitted, financial data is submitted for a federation, that the comparator group is made up of characteristics that relate to the federation, and not the individual school that the data was submitted against through CFR. So that's where we'd like to get to. It's not quite there yet. We're hoping to get that resolved by the next data refresh for federations. In the meantime, what you can do is you can use select comparators to create your own group, again based on the federation characteristics, or even potentially in data modeling. You could change the non-financial data to the data that relates to the federation and rerun VMFI that way. Both would kind of create a custom group that's more aligned to your needs until we get that fixed for you.
Thanks, Gav. We've had a couple of questions relating to ledger codes and how some of these various categories are coded. An example was given of IT costs. As an example, different approaches can make a big difference. So whether IT support is coded to IT or curriculum support, for example. Is this just an inherent weakness that has to be allowed for?
There is something of an inherent weakness within that. We've tried as much as we can. So I mean, this is kind of more a data collection issue, which then manifests itself through the insights we push back out. So it's the sort of thing that comes to the fore when we're looking at these sort of things. But we do kind of feed back through the process and try and improve things with our data collection colleagues. So there's a kind of a couple of things there. So for both maintained schools, the CFR return, and for academies, the accounts return, the detailed guidance on the individual cells that you're required to fill in is the same or almost exactly the same. So it's trying to get consistency between the two. In addition to that, what we now have is we now have the Academy Chart of Accounts, which is linked to our automation project, but it's a publicly available, downloadable set of ledger codes on gov.uk, and we've mapped that to where it will go in or should go in the benchmarking section of the accounts return, and therefore by nature the CFR return for maintained schools. So it could work as a bit of a tool, and because that's a more detailed set of ledger codes, some of the codes where you've got a bit of doubt about you might get a bit of clarity. Our automation project for academies, if you use that or move to that and send your data through, that mapping will be where we put the data in your return, which will improve consistency across the sector too. In terms of IT costs specifically, there is an additional inherent problem in that often IT is the type of thing that is done as a group. You'll save it for a couple of years, then you'll refresh IT, and it actually becomes a capital cost. And that's the reason why sometimes IT costs are either missing or low on the revenue side. And that's because capital costs aren't included in any of our benchmarking tools. So IT costs has another element to it related to capitalisation.
Thanks, Gav. Do the meter squared figures take into account split sites?
Yes, they will do. It's based on the data return that feeds into our condition data set. So yes, it will include split sites. Effectively, it's the school, the size of the school in totality.
Thanks, Gav. A couple of questions on how best to utilise this for maths with various schools and locations, and also a linked one. How do we deal with maths centralised costs?
So for multi-academy trusts, we think VMFI is particularly helpful in the kind of that first bit of the demo that Bethan showed around seeing in one place ranked areas of investigation across all schools, and the graphs that show the cost categories with all schools on. It kind of gives a new nuance to some of the stuff we put out before, and again that came from schools as being helpful to see for finance teams and trustee boards at the centre. So hopefully some of that demo will have cleared that up. In terms of Matt Central costs, what we do is we take the cost based on the expenditure code that's been placed on in the return, and we share that across the constituent schools in the trust. And that will be either based on pupil numbers if it goes into a pupil number category, or metre squared if it goes into premises or utilities.
Thanks, Gav. A couple of questions on whether you can download the data to share with governors or directors.
Yeah, really popular question. And we're kind of sorry that we've not been able to push this ahead as much as we can. We do have limitations based on the technology that is there. It's Microsoft Power BI that sits in where all the graphs you see. It's part of Microsoft Power BI, and when it sits in a web app, it's difficult to do because the bit in the screen is kind of transient. So it's very, very difficult. The functionality is not really there to download it. We're desperately working on solutions around that because it's a very popular question, and we're aware that schools are doing a couple of things. So in board meetings or SLTs, they might put a big screen up and display a laptop on a big screen and go through VMFI as an electronic tool that way. And the other way is through screen grab type apps, which can, if there's particular screens, dashboards that would be of interest to SLTs, people are using that and then just kind of dropping it into Word, creating a space then for contextual text to be added to the bottom of it, etc. So it is something we desperately want to resolve, and the workarounds aren't great, but there are workarounds.
Thanks, Gav. Just before I go back to the questions, Chris has put one more poll up, if that would be possible. We'll just take a minute to let people answer these.
Yeah, that'd be great. Again, we're just really quite keen to understand how VMFI is being used or could be used, and where you think it would be of most use to you. So yeah, if you can click away on that, that's fantastic.
Thanks, Gav. We'll just leave that up in the chat and carry on the questions because there's still quite a lot to go through, if that's okay. Next question, it goes back to the benchmark, and will there be a requirement to use VMFI in any benchmarking returns, or as part of an SFVS, or as a good practice tool to share with governors?
So the way we've phrased it is that we expect schools to do some form of benchmarking, but we've then pulled back on or are now silent on how that's done. So whether that's VMFI, whether that's the benchmarking side, whether that's, we are aware locally in some places there are really effective benchmarking clubs going, groups going. So the requirement is that some form of benchmarking is good practice and will help you kind of understand contextually how you sit with your peers. But we don't push a particular one. And as kind of referring back to the earlier answer, there are benefits and across the various tools we're told of by schools about which ones are kind of slightly favourites in particular circumstances, and where one is more helpful than the other. So they all have the place, and as a result, we kind of don't push you down a particular alley, especially if that's not going to be helpful.
Thanks, Gav. Is there a way to pick comparator schools for inner and outer London?
Yeah, you can do that through the select comparator function. So if you want to do that, then create your own comparator list, and you are able to you've got a full range of functionality about how you select your comparator there, including inner and outer London schools.
Thanks, Gav. Do we include nurseries in the characteristics, as these can skew the numbers?
Yep, you're right, and there are other elements of schools that can have a similar effect. I think it kind of goes back to the way the data comes into us. So schools with nurseries as part of a primary school or as part of an infant school, you don't separate the data out. You just send us the data for the full school, including the nursery, and effectively that's the way we then push the insights back out. So yes, you may see some slight differences if you were comparing a school with a nursery without one, but counter to that, you can also change the view. So you could look at percentage of income and look at the view there, and you know, if and see whether that changes how your school compares to peers as well. It kind of just changes the way the data looks and reduces the impact of some of those things, and can also reduce the impact of some of the geographical things where schools are in different different areas of funding.
Thanks, Gav. A similar question in relation to sixth form colleges. Is this data included?
Yeah, so sixth form colleges, we've got a problem we're close to resolving, we think. The pupil numbers don't come in the same way as pre-16, and therefore we can't put sixth forms in a comparator group, and nor can display the graphs on a per pupil basis at the moment. So we're trying to come up with a fix. We've moved forward on that a fair bit, but it's not there yet, unfortunately, for sixth forms.
Thanks, Gav. Do we include any data on depreciation costs?
We don't. Similar to, it's kind of a data collection thing, so depreciation isn't included in the CFR for maintained schools because it doesn't affect them in the same way, and it's excluded from the benchmarking section of the accounts return, and therefore, because the data is excluded, we don't include it in VMFI. The kind of other thing as well is would depreciation be a useful benchmarking metric for schools, because it's kind of driven by your local policies and academy trust, how you depreciate assets, rather than kind of something you can deliberately control or put corrective action into if you so wished.
Thanks, Gav. Would high revenue reserves as a percentage of income attract the interest of the ESFA?
Oh, there's a question. That's a belter. I probably can't give you an answer because we're not responsible for that policy area, our team. Just being honest with you, we sit within the finance function of the department, so we don't have any influence about what the ESFA may look at. I am aware from conversations that high levels of balances is something that is of particular interest. It's one of those things that comes around, goes around over the years. For those of you who've worked in schools for a long time, you'll know this. So I can't give you a definitive answer because it's in a policy area we just don't have any influence over.
Thanks, Gav. What level of variance between the BFR and the ER is considered a red flag?
Oh, you're coming up with some crackers today. So it doesn't come up as a flag, so you won't be flagged red. There is a message which shows significantly above or significantly below. I think the best thing we can do there is in the Q&A document we'll send out, we'll include that threshold in there, but all it does is kind of change the message on that screen. It doesn't kind of flag as a red flag or anything like that. But we will give you the thresholds at which those messages change.
Thanks, Gav. Would it be possible to have grammar schools as a group comparator?
Oh, there's a question. We can certainly have a look at it. What we do periodically is have a look at the structure of the school sector as a whole. So we have to kind of find a bit of a balance, because the more groups we create, and the fewer schools that sit within a group, then the 30 schools that are more similar to you suddenly start to become less statistically similar because you're taking them from a smaller pool. So we've got a bit of a balance to find. We can certainly have a look at grammar schools. I'm not aware we've done it before, but that's kind of the approach we'll take. We can also look, if it's not there, I can't remember off the top of my head, we can also look to see whether it's a filter we could put into select comparators. So if you are a grammar school and definitely wanted to do that, you'd be able to do that through that route.
Thanks, Gav. Is there a dummy account for suppliers to access?
Sorry?
Is there a dummy account for suppliers to access?
No, there isn't. So access to VMFI is created locally. So the routes we enable you through either an IDAMS account or a DFE sign-in account. which, depending on whether you're an academy or a maintained school, you'll most likely have one of those. We give you the ability locally to manage who can see your data for your organisation. If there are third parties, maybe your auditor, maybe an external financial company you buy support from, you can set that up locally if you wish, but it's not something we would do as the DFE. We very much give the ownership of who can see a school's data to individual schools and trusts.
Thanks, Gav. I think given the time, and we have run through most of the questions, but final one, what time of the year is the data updated?
So we do 3 updates a year, and they're linked to the main returns that we get in. So for maintained schools, that's the consistent financial reporting return, which comes in the summer. For academies, there are 2. There's the budget forecast return, which updates the budget and risk metrics page. That comes in the summer, and there's the accounts return, which comes in at the end of January. What we have been able to do with VMFI is for the academy sector, which is where we kind of first developed it from. We built an end-to-end process which enabled us to update that in a number of weeks. So the data came in towards the end of January, and VMFI was updated towards the end of March. We'd like that to be a little bit quicker, if we possibly can do. For maintained schools, we need to have a look at it because there's quite a lagged process with maintained schools. We had some technical stuff we needed to sort out this year, which caused us a delay. It was launched on the 1st of March, which is too long. We would ideally like that to get pre-Christmas in terms of our technology side of things, in terms of turning around the data. What we would also like to look at, if it's possible, is whether we can look at how that data is collected and whether we're able to streamline that process a bit further to bring forward. Essentially, schools tell us the earlier the better, and that's what we're striving to do as much as we possibly can.
Thanks, Gav. I think given the time, we should end it there, just to say we'll put together a document with all the questions and answers and get that emailed out over the next few days. But thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. That's I hope that's been helpful for you to kind of get an oversight of VMFI. I hope it's kind of given you a bit of desire to go away and play with it yourselves and have a look at your trust, your school. If you're an LA user, you can see all of the maintained schools that you're responsible for. So I hope it's kind of given you food for thought there, and it will be useful to you. As we mentioned at the front, we'd love to hear where you've done that. So please do drop us a line, drop us an email. We'd love to hear that. Hopefully you'll find VMFI useful. So thank you for your time today, and hopefully see you again on one of these. Thanks now.